Nope. Nope. I wasn't ready. Okay, now I'm ready. Good evening, everyone. This is Mr. Patriarch joining you for an impromptu live stream. That seems to be the only live streams I do these days is impromptu. Because to be very honest, I'm quite busy with my life. And I have not a lot of what you would call drive to be like a professional content creator or anything. I make my cheese in different ways. And I'm just sending a message here. I'm doing improv. Anyways, the incentive for me is to make stuff when it like really gets me, like when something really gets my attention. And tonight is one of those nights. I've had occasion on 2 occasions to quite recently. What am I talking about? I need to have more to drink, I think. I've had occasion recently to be exposed to takes and questions on South Africa by people I know. And then I was listening to the Good Old Boys podcast today on my way back home from work, and they started talking from South Africa, and I was like, I wish somebody could talk to these boys about it. So in any case, that's what prompted this live stream. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna just do it right now. What's the deal with South Africa? Doom doom dookie doom 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 dookie doom boom. So that was a Seinfeld joke for the Zoomers. So anyways, South Africa, it's in the news right now because they are facing crippling rolling blackouts. That is the latest catastrophe facing the country. So I would say recently, okay, so first off, for people listening who don't know, why am I someone who should be sounding off on South Africa? Well, simple matter is, I lived in South Africa for 5 years before moving back in 2022. And my wife and 2 kids are still in South Africa. They are, my wife is a South African citizen, and we're just waiting for our immigration paperwork to go through, and it looks like she should be here definitely by summertime. Northern Hemisphere, that is. So I know I have some firsthand experience with the country of South Africa. And it would seem that a lot of takes, to be honest, are not. It's like looking at what's happening from 30,000 feet, and South Africa will feed into people's news feeds in one of 2 ways. A, it won't feed in at all because Western countries don't like talking about it. Or it'll feed into, right-wing news feeds is like, see, look how shit South Africa is. And whites must fear for their lives and so on and so forth. Really, the truth is, it is obviously bad, which is patently ignored by Western governments. But especially depending on where you live, it is by no means the dire circumstance that certain right-wing commentators who are have more of a racial axe to grind would have you believe. And I say this, again, as someone who has family in the country who lived there for, I can't believe it, half a decade. And, I know the place. And I know people there. I still talk to people who live there all the time. So I figured I'd weigh in a little bit on the current goings on in South Africa because there seems to be some interest in it once again. So the thing is that the power grid of South Africa is in terminal decline. And it has been for quite some time. So South Africa, yeah, exactly, from Boogaloo Boerseun. So that means Boogaloo farmer's son in Afrikaans, if I'm reading that correctly. I'm literally watching this while load shedding, yes. From glow in the dark, crippling blackouts, the recent catastrophe facing the country. Recent? Yes. I'll get to that later. So there are extremely bad rolling blackouts. Let me put it that way. Oh man, he just gave me the pass. Blue Borsian has approved of my pronunciation. Very good. So there has currently right now there are extremely bad blackouts. So for about 8 to 12 hours a day, depending on where you are and depending on how bad the load shedding is, people are without electricity. And when I lived in South Africa, and this is a relatively recent development, there was load shedding pretty regularly. And the power would go out for hours at a time. Usually, they usually try to do it in 2-hour blocks, and they space it out. They have it set to a schedule. But with the intensification of the rustification of the Eskom power grid, this has increased to the point now where that they are doing load shedding instead of in 2-hour blocks, they're doing them in 4-hour blocks, and they're doing them 2 to 3 times a day. Again, depending on the day. I remember load shedding. We would have a couple of days like this, and then it would revert back to like normal load shedding, and then there'd be no load shedding. And yeah, it was shit. It was really bad. And especially because with my work, I as with many people who earn money, you rely on electricity. And if you have no electricity, it's hard to make money, which is one of the reasons why South Africa's economy has flatlined for basically the past decade or so. It's because the electrical grid cannot sustain new industry in the country. So no industry is going to be built because Eskom has the monopoly on the industry. Now, if you live in Cape Town, it's still bad, but it's slightly better. And the reason for this is that the city of Cape Town has some degree of its own electrical capacity. So it is able to insulate, residents of Cape Town slightly, not by much, but slightly, from the Eskom load shedding. So, for example, if it's like stage 3 load shedding in the country, and that means that your power might be shut off for like, I don't know, depending on the day, like 4 to 6 hours, they might be able to intervene with their own electrical capacity and make that so it's only 2 to 4 hours, something like that. And this is, one of the perks of living in the Cape. And so, a lot of people are moving there, obviously. Now, it's not just the power that's a problem, it's water that's a problem. So basically, if you look at the infrastructure across South Africa right now, it's really bad. So you have whole parts of Johannesburg now where, people are lining up for water because the sewage, the water treatment plants that used to work no longer function. And the, what would you call it? The pipes. Yeah. So the infrastructure to shuttle water around these urban areas has literally corroded and not been replaced. So you have springing leaks, you have pipes, old pipes that are constantly leaking water, which is which is a problem because it creates unnecessary waste at a mass level. And you also have water treatment facilities break down in certain parts of South Africa. And yeah, it's just a shit show. And now you don't have power for much of the day. On top of this, you have other infrastructure collapsing. The rail network is also monopolized. And that too is going to hell. So a lot of mining companies are struggling to actually get their ore out of the country for the simple fact that the railways are no longer a reliable way to transport goods to the coast for export. Again, on some rail lines. Bridges, roads, same thing. If you go to the Eastern Cape or parts of Gauteng or Mpumalanga, Limpopo, or Die Vrystaat, the Free State, some of these roads look like moonscapes. Okay, so they're just pockmarked with, potholes that aren't being filled and so on and so forth. And it's really, really bad. Now, the way around this is that if you do have money and you aren't leaving or can't leave, certain localities are able to sort of create enclaves. And there's a guy called Franz Crunier who was the former CEO of the South African Institute of Race Relations, which is kind of a sort of conservative, classically liberal think tank in South Africa. And one of the things that he said is that South Africa is probably going to become an enclave society. So you'll have different sections of the country where you have pockets of civilization, basically. And then outside will be, in the rural areas, a poor, impoverished serf class, for lack of a better term, with hardly any money and no prospects. And then in large swaths, not all, but large swaths of urban areas, you'll have them run by gangs. And the way outside of that is you create these functional enclaves where you provide a lot of things yourself. And we're already seeing this in South Africa. It's been in the works for quite a long time. So one of the stats he pulls up is in 1994, there are about 100,000 policemen and 100,000 security guards in South Africa. And I think in 2017, there are 150,000 policemen and about close to 500,000 private security guards. Same thing with, what you call them? So security has basically been largely taken up by the private sector because the state has comprehensively failed across the board. And another thing that you're seeing is networks of people where they just fill in their own potholes. They have their own community watch private medicine is allowed to operate in South Africa, at least for now. And these are ways to get around the total shit status of most of the state provided services in the country. The other option, so those are the two options. So you live in a failing state, or you try to basically you get double taxed essentially. So you get taxed by the government, and then through your own private means, you shoehorn money into things that the state should be providing, like security, filling potholes or whatever. And, some might say medicine, but we'll leave that aside for now. The other option is that you can live in a nice area of South Africa. Now, I know this might be hard to believe, but there are some really nice places in South Africa where you don't have a lot of crime or nothing that's serious. You're not worried about your wife getting raped or, murdered or anything like that. There are places like that do exist, and they are predominantly concentrated in the Eastern Cape. I'm sorry, the Western Cape, not the Eastern Cape. Eastern Cape is not particularly nice. Now, the Western Cape is different for a number of reasons. First off, it is the one area of South Africa which is kind of economically growing compared to the rest. Someone's going to say Oranje, yeah. But the thing is that so the Western Cape is the one part of the country which is, relatively speaking, not so bad. You don't have moonscape roads. The municipal police, they'll give you traffic tickets. There are South African police services, which deals with traffic, with criminal convictions and stuff. Yeah, they're corrupt and whatever and blah, blah, blah. But the infrastructure generally works better in the Western Cape. Like I said, in Cape Town, they do have their own power generation to a certain extent, which helps alleviate it. They try to maintain the infrastructure as best they can. The largest racial group in the Western Cape, and it's the only case in South Africa, are the coloreds, who are, as I've said on multiple occasions, the Mexicans of South Africa, mixed race between Europeans and the Khoisan predominantly. And they speak Afrikaans, and they're westernized enough so that they kind of get along with the whites generally well. They understand, they're different, but, they're we understand them. They kind of get us, and whatever. It's fine. And both of those people in the Western Cape recognize the ANC as hostile to them. So the government of the Western Cape, the provincial government of the Western Cape, is run by the DA. Now, the DA stands for the Democratic Alliance, and it is basically a minority party with liberal leanings. You could think about them as basically kind of more competent, definitely, but basically 2008 Obama. If that cues you in on sort of where they are on social issues and stuff. So, not a great party, but better than the ANC. So a lot of people vote for them. And so as a result, the Western Cape has a lot of little towns and stuff in it, especially some of the smaller towns and cities, which are quite nice to live in. So I myself lived in the Western Cape, both in Cape Town and outside of Cape Town. and but not far from it. And I've traveled around the Western Cape. That's where I spent basically on most all my time in South Africa. And it's a very different place. It has a lot of problems. So you have certain social pathologies, particularly in Cape Town, from the coloreds who live there. But it's of a different kind, I would say. So the temptation there for them is more substance abuse and gang culture, but they don't particularly target citizens, or I'm sorry, other people for like random acts of violence. So you may be robbed by like a colored gangster or whatever, but he's not going to like kill you. If that makes you feel any better. It made me feel better. I lived for a time for about, I don't know, if you add it all up, probably about more than 6 months. Yeah, more than 6 months in an area of South Cape Town called Mitchell's Plain, which is a notorious area of Cape Town. Far majority of them are colored, and it's known for gangs and crap like that. And I never really had any problems, to be honest. Like I always describe it as like Compton, but poorer. Is Mitchell's Plain, which I think is kind of true. It basically is. But I don't know. I just never had any problems really. Like I think I might have had some flip flops stolen at some point, but I don't know. But it's a very different place than some of the other black townships, like Philippi or Kailicha or Nyanga or Guguletu. These places are more dangerous for, again, random acts of violence. So if you live in Mitchell's Plain, if you're in a gang, there's a good chance that you'll be shot. And if you are affiliated with someone who is in a gang, there's also a good chance that you may be shot as well, just by proximity, by being in proximity to the gang members. But it's not necessarily because they want to kill you. You just happen to be there, cavorting with the gang members. So, which is, so basically, if you know the areas of Mitchell's Plain, which are hot, let's just say, or certain areas like Hanover Park, which are outside of Mitchell's Plain, but I don't know. They might technically be in, but anyways, it's sort of on the outskirts. It's not a nice place. You got to worry about people stealing your shit all the time, and you got to lock up your car at night, park it in a garage, otherwise it'll be broken into, stuff like that. But the sort of horror stories that you hear about in South Africa, like some of the stuff Alpha Forum talks about with the farm murders and whatever, that's not really going to happen to you. The coloreds don't really have a racial axe to grind against whites. They don't. And they see Americans as like unaffiliated. Like, they don't blame Americans for apartheid or anything. You're much more likely to be asked for money if you're like a white guy in a colored area like Mitchell's Plain. But you're not really going to be accosted. Like, again, like I said, I've spent a long time in these places, and that's where my wife's from. So it's not a, how would you call it? It's not a perfect situation in terms of relations between whites and coloreds, but they understand each other. And there's, again, no real axe to grind against the whites. So the problem facing the Western Cape is that as things get shittier and shittier in South Africa at large, things stay relatively functional in the Western Cape, which, of course, means that people are going to want to move there. And who moves there? You get some whites from like Johannesburg and places, but you get a lot of Xhosas. A lot of Xhosas. A lot of Bantu people from the Eastern Cape flood in. And over time, what this is, unless this at some point stops or reverses, this is going to have profound demographic implications for what the Western Cape is going to be. Now, in the Eastern Cape, that's kind of what you might call sort of ANC heartland to a certain extent, especially in the rural areas. And basically, you don't want a situation where Xhosa immigration to the Western Cape is allowed to carry on in perpetuity, because that will have very negative consequences for the province as a whole. And it might be a situation like the Northern Cape, where, for example, which is also has a lot of coloreds as well. But the issue with the Northern Cape is that what happened is the various Bantu people concentrated in the capital of the Northern Cape, the largest city, and then they sort of demographically control this voting area, and then they turn it into an ANC province. Now, the good news is that if you get out, from my understanding, if you get outside of the large urban areas, it is predominantly a colored province. So you're able to have, in conjunction with the whites and the coloreds kind of working together electorally, you're able to have a fairly functional, or more functional, let's say, not fairly functional, but more functional, more safe communities, smaller ones. But the big city, I think it's called Buffalo City in the Northern Cape, is just kind of, it is what it is. So this is kind of the struggle that the Western Cape faces right now. And there's a lot of pressure, or not a lot, but there is some pressure and general support, I would say. So general support plus some pressure for the Western Cape to break off and become its own country. And I would love to see that happen. I'm not so certain that it can happen. But I want them to try. I do. I want them to try, because the alternative is to, de facto maybe be independent of the ANC regime as it sort of crumbles, but you leave yourself open to a lot of risk there. And again, the demographic issue is a real thing. So as South Africa becomes more and more of a failed state, if you want to call it that, the Western Cape becomes more enticing, and the more people are going to move there, which is going to make it look more like the rest of South Africa, simply put. So in that sense, yeah, I'm for Cape secession. That's kind of the province that I'm most familiar with, the Western Cape. Like I said, there's still, to this day, many nice places that I would say you could feel comfortable as a tourist visiting. Beautiful places, cheap food, low prices. It's great. Wonderful climate. And not dangerous, frankly. A lot of these towns, especially on the West Coast, or some of the ones inland, not dangerous. It's not like Gauteng or like Johannesburg or Pretoria. So that's sort of the the problem that faces the Western Cape particularly has a provincial government which is kind of competent, can do service delivery, can manage infrastructure relatively well, is not wholly corrupt and subject to cater deployment like the ANC. But the problem is that they're liberals at the end of the day, and they don't get it in terms of, dealing with the ANC and wanting in their hearts to be part of the South African experiment, succeeding. Now, if you look at the rest of the country, we're in an interesting situation in terms of national politics. So this is the part of the show where I talk about national politics. Okay, I'm just going to look at the comments here before I talk about national politics. Boogaloo Borsian, competent but super gay. Yeah, that's a fair criticism. Yeah. Pretty crazy that at one point they had nukes Lamau. Talk about falling off. Yeah, that's true. That was one of the things that one of the last things the National Party during the apartheid government did before they handed the keys over to the ANC is they got rid of their nukes. Yeah, that's what they did, because I think, reasonably they did not trust the ANC with them. Not because I don't think they thought the ANC would shoot them at, like, I don't know, who would the ANC shoot them at, but they didn't trust them to handle them, which I think is right. Oh, speaking of South Africa, one of my South African boyos is down here. Yes, he just name doxed me. Yes. No problem though, Russell. It's cool, bud. I ain't scared of being canceled. Well, not that scared. So here we go. Black townships closer to colored neighborhoods, more friction there. Yeah, okay. So that's another thing. The coloreds don't get on particularly well with the blacks. They're fine with them if they're kind of over there doing their thing. But when colored townships and black townships run up against each other, and you inevitably have, residents from the black townships robbing from the coloreds get really pissed off about it. And there was a situation, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, where you had basically a mob of angry coloreds getting ready to knock down this, what would you call it? Settlement. What's the word? What's the word they use? Not impromptu settlement. Damn it. Whatever. A land invasion. Informal settlement. There you go. Next to this informal settlement. And then the city of Cape Town basically had to intervene to prevent basically a race riot from occurring. Now, this is, to be clear, Boogaloo Borsian has a good point, or is getting at something here with his comment, though he doesn't know it. Is that the difference with a lot of these black townships, much less so with the colored ones, they are typically settled. But what happens is that a lot of these people from the Eastern Cape will move to the Western Cape within the Cape Town metro area, and they will literally just like put down sticks in land which doesn't have a structure set on it. So municipal land, by and large, which is owned by the city, they'll just move out there and start setting up shacks, literally by the thousands. And then once they do that, because of, property law or whatever within South Africa, it's very difficult to remove them. So they never move. And then they grow, and then they complain that there's no electricity or water treatment out where they are. So then the city has to try to get electricity and water treatment out to where they are. And this, it's pretty unbelievable, actually. Like the first time I drove by Kailicha, which is one of these black townships along the coast, on my way to or from Mitchell's Plain, I was shocked by the sea of shacks that I saw. A literal, again, it's just it's hard to express what that looks like to someone who hasn't been there, but it's quite shocking. And again, these people, they don't own this land. They just, again, like I say, move in by their thousands and tens of thousands and set up shop. And then, that's it. So it's a real problem. What was I talking about in South Africa at large? Okay, so I think that's about it for the, what would you call it? I'm scrolling through there. So we get back on the proper etymology. So Indians do not equal coloreds. That is correct. So the coloreds are mixed race, European and Khoisan, and in the city of Cape Town, European, Khoisan, and Malaysian, which is why you have a large minority of Muslim coloreds. It's from that right there. Went back recently to the Western Cape after my parents were beaten to a pulp by thieves. Cape Town suburbia is being fled. Yep, I can believe it. Sad. You hate to see it. But it is true. A lot of these places, particularly in close proximity to a lot of these townships, they just get targeted for robbery, basically, and looting. So it's not good. How many nations will come out of the collapse of South Africa? That remains to be seen. All right. So now the thing with South African national politics is that, and this is kind of what I wanted to do this stream, there's a false belief that the ANC has total support from the population, by which I mean the black population. They don't, actually. So about half of black voters, or half of all voters who could vote in South Africa, and who could vote in South Africa, chose not to in the most recent elections. And the ANC squeaked by, I think, with 52% of the vote. And this is before these crippling blackouts kicked in, or the COVID-19 lockdowns, or the riots in KwaZulu-Natal, or anything like that. So the black electorate, generally speaking, when they're upset, they just choose not to vote at all. They just check out. They don't vote for the opposition party. They just don't vote. And the alternatives, frankly, aren't a whole lot better. So the DA is better, like I said, in terms of service delivery. But like our fellow commentator said, they're, GAE a little bit, which is true. But the issue is that the ANC support is failing. And in the next election, it's almost certain that they will dip below 50%. Now, I was listening to the Good Old Boys podcast, like I said, and I think Merrick was saying that the second largest party is the Economic Freedom Fighters. That is not actually true. The second largest party is the Democratic Alliance, who has, again, like 20-something% of the vote, maybe up to a quarter. I don't know. But yeah, that is the second largest party by a considerable margin. The third largest party is the Economic Freedom Fighters, who Merrick mentioned. And despite all the shit going on in South Africa, their support is basically flatlined. They can't really get much above 10% of the vote. I think they might be at 12, but again, like, it's not, their support really isn't that deep, despite how bad things are in South Africa and despite, what you might expect the populace to do with the promise of more Gibbs or whatever. There's actually not a whole lot of support for them. But the problem is that if the ANC does dip below 50%, and if they, remain, if they are not like super far below 50% in the next election, there's a very real chance that the ANC could form a coalition government with the EFF. Now, that would be really bad for a number of reasons, because basically, best case scenario, it would basically create another ANC administration for another 5 to 10 years, depending on how long this coalition's in power. But the other problem is that as things collapse, the ANC EFF may pull a Mugabe and decide that, democracy, the will of the people, isn't worth giving up power. And so, they'll just dispense with elections or fortify them to the point where they don't matter anymore, which is a possibility. Or they may just, even if they don't do that, they may just step on the gas and loot the country even more until basically it's out of gas entirely. And that's also a possibility. So best case scenario with an EFF ANC coalition, you get ANC 2.0 for more time, more degradation. Second phase, they dispense with democracy. Third phase, it's ANC on steroids, and they just destroy the country in the meantime even further. Now, this is a very real possibility. And probably the most likely one, to be honest, is an ANC EFF coalition. Because the creator of the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, was a guy named Julius Malema, who is basically a black nationalist Leninist in terms of his rhetoric. I think he mostly just cares about having power, to be honest. And he has an axe to grind against white people, more so than the ANC. And he'll say or do whatever he needs to try to get power or popularity. Like, he doesn't give a shit. Like, this guy is totally without principles. But yeah, this coalition with the ANC EFF, I think, is the most likely option. What that government looks like when it comes into power, I absolutely do not see it getting any better. But I don't know how much worse it's going to get. The question is, with the ANC EFF government, is how much worse are they going to make things for the people who live there? That's the real fundamental question. However, Franz Crunier, who I mentioned earlier in this stream, the former head of the South African Institute of Race Relations, he points to something interesting, which I think is probably true, in that the ANC is actually very not entirely unified party. You do have like some pragmatists in it who, for liberation can't drop the party, but they also recognize that it's screwed and the country is screwed. And the question is how many of them would be willing to push the party into a coalition with the DA, the Democratic Alliance, and give them a mandate to rule that way? That is also an interesting question. I don't know how likely that is to occur. I think it's more likely that the ANC will form a coalition with the EFF, which is much more dangerous. However, the problem with the EFF is that they're actually really smart political operators. Like they're horrible people, but they're much more skilled and deft and good at like propaganda than the ANC is, I think. And if they do join a coalition with the ANC, I think that there will be a power struggle within that coalition where Julius Malema will probably try to seize power from whoever's in charge at the time of the ANC. So whether that's Cyril Ramaphosa or Paul Kagame or Ace Magashule or somebody, I don't know, may come to blows. And the ANC just might see it as more worth it to just make a coalition with the DA. Because the DA are a bunch of nerds, liberal nerds, essentially. So the ANC might make a deal where they're like, all right, don't smash our rice bowls. We got to have the graft going. But you guys can, fix the roads and handle the infrastructure and stuff like that. That is a possibility. Again, I think it's more likely that the ANC will form a coalition with the EFF. But it's not entirely out of the realm of possibility that they may form a coalition with the DA. Now, a third alternative to that is the ANC and the EFF both combined fall below 50%. And the DA is able to lead a coalition of a bajillion different smaller parties to create, a party on a platform of national unity and overthrowing the ANC, to create a coalition government of like a bajillion different, factions to wrest control from the ANC and the EFF. That is possible, though of the three options, I'm probably least hopeful for that one, just because I do not think that the ANC EFF between the two of them will dip below 50%. I just don't. I think the ANC might be in the low 40s range in the next election. Their support may drop by another 10%. But then they'll just form a coalition with the EFF, which is about 10%, 10 to 12. And then there you go. Unless, like I say, they go with the DA to sort of stay in power. Now, the third option is kind of the problem that you had sort of in Israel, where they cobbled together like every single, nobody to form a coalition government to get rid of Bibi Netanyahu. But then this government proved to be unstable, and then Netanyahu's back with the Likud party. I think that is quite a distinct possibility in South Africa if the DA does cobble together all these disparate groups to form a coalition of national unity or whatever against the ANC. That could very well happen. So even if the DA does succeed, it's going to be very hard, I think, for them to sort of hold the coalition together. And what that means for South Africa going forward is anybody's guess. I think South Africa is definitely at a crossroads right now. And the future is very much uncertain. I think out of all the different prospects for South Africa, you have basically a choice of decline, more decline, total collapse are your choices. Just because even if the D8 does sort of cobble together a functional coalition and is able to put it together, it's going to take a very long time for them to undo the damage of 25 years of, or 20, whatever, almost 30 years at this point, almost 30 years of ANC rule. And yeah, that's a real freaking problem. And the other option is that you have balkanization. Now, balkanization, like I mentioned earlier, there is some interest for that in the Cape. I think the people there want it. From the polls that I've seen, most people there seem to be game for the idea that, you know, the Western Cape becomes its own country. But the problem is that the political will from the people who have power within the province is not there. It may have its hand, they may have their hand forced by circumstance, particularly if the ANC and EFF form a coalition and go whole hog, you know, against the last vestiges of property rights or land confiscation or whatever. Like if they try to turn South Africa into Zimbabwe 2.0, there's a decent chance that the DA in that point, basically seeing existential pressure, might break and support secession. But I don't know. These are libs we're talking about. Also, interestingly, which is not talked about in Western commentary very much, is that the Zulus in KwaZulu-Natal are a bit different from the rest of Bantu South Africa in that they have a monarch to this day, a king of the Zulus who has powers and privileges, again, allowed by the state, but he does sort of command a lot of sway among the Zulu people. So that if he was to see, so that if the Zulus were able to marshal their forces, if you want to put it that way, and turn on the national government, if they basically, you know, try to go for the ring and turn South Africa into Zimbabwe, the Zulus might do that. Actually, they might not, but I think there's a not a totally implausible chance that the Zulus might break with the rest of South Africa if the country is truly going into collapse territory. And like I said, the Western Cape as well, but through democratic processes and less, less machismo, let's just say. So that's kind of where South Africa is at right now. It's in a holding place. It's in a very uncomfortable position. The ANC knows they're not popular. I saw from my friend Russell in South Africa. From a man on the ground, some say ANC support is currently at 37%. I've heard that too. I heard like 37, 38% support. So if they really hemorrhage support between now and the election in, 2024, 2025, something like that, if they really do hemorrhage support between now and then, it might be game over and the DA might be able to form a coalition government. But yeah, it'll be interesting because South Africa, like much of the world, like I say, is in a crossroads. Like it's caught in stasis. the political party, I think a lot of them, to be frank, and this is where I think South Africa is different from Zimbabwe in an important way, is that people believe, people in the party believe in like the National Democratic Revolution, which is basically Afro-Marxism, but they believe in it, but they also see themselves as the good guys, right? And if you start, and they believe in democracy, and if you start canceling or fortifying democracy and killing your opponents and openly cracking down on minorities, it becomes very hard, I think, for a lot of them to get on board with that. Now, you do have some elements within the South African government who would have no problem doing that. But there are certain indicators that you see where South Africa is not entirely going along the Zimbabwe route. So the whole thing about, Robert Mugabe staying in power so long as the army gets paid, South Africa's military is kind of useless. Not entirely, but nobody's really scared of the military in South Africa. And they're corrupt and incompetent just like everybody else. But also, Zimbabwe, when they got into trouble, they did money printing. South Africa has not done that in order to stay in power. So it would be and this is something Franz Prunier talks about, which I think is a decent point, is that in order to stay in power, Mugabe, printed money to basically make sure that the right palms were greased in order for ZANU-PF to remain in control of the country. But to their credit, the South African state has not done that yet. And they see electoral defeat on the horizon. It's right there. It's not like something that may happen or might not happen. Basically, if shenanigans don't occur, they're going to be out of a majority position. And the other thing, too, is that as things fail with power, with security or whatever, they turn to the private sector. So they, they're like, okay, there's no electricity. Let's get some private contractors, solar panels or whatever, like Saudi power generation ships to come in and try to prop up the country. There are some things that they don't budge on at all, like labor reform or cadre deployment of basically lackeys in the government departments to make sure that the ANC runs literally everything, because there's too much patronage at stake. There's too many rice bowls at risk of being smashed. So they're not going to give up on that stuff. But I don't know. It's an interesting thing. If the ANC really does go whole hog on the Zimbabwe track, I think there's a decent chance that you might see a split in the ANC, where some of the members will try to form a thing with the Democratic Alliance and some smaller parties. But if the ANC is bent on doing that, then how much does democracy matter at that point? That's a risky thing about Africa, man. It's things are good until they ain't. And South Africa might be hurtling there in any case. So I guess that's about it. Hopefully, I've provided you some insight on South Africa. I've been going for an hour now. If you have any questions, you can send a super chat or a super fat. I like super fats. Super fats are good. You can send me a super fat, or I can scroll through the comments. But I want to incentivize monetary contribution, so there's that. Let me see. Scrolling through the comments here. So from Jorge Wenda, how does Cape Town vote? Cape Town votes for the Democratic Alliance. And not just Cape Town, but the whole province. So if you go outside of Cape Town, these other places will vote for the DA as well. Except for, again, certain black enclaves within the province. Moving to Georgia is starting to sound really appealing with those options presented, lol. Yeah, glow in the dark. Are you from South Africa, man? I don't know. I feel like you might be. I would like a better choice, please. Yeah, well, this is the thing, South Africa is very much on the rails to this right now. But basically, if the ANC with the EFF doesn't go total Zimbabwe, which is only one of the options that I mentioned, things will get shitty, yes, shittier than they are now, but in some of these enclaves, you'll be able to live a decent life. The problem is then you'll basically be living like an expat at like a Sandals Jamaica resort in your own country. Frankly, which is not an ideal situation because you'll have basically pockets of civilization and order and prosperity, but then once you get out of those, it's a jungle. So I don't know, but even that said, you'll still be, and South Africa's already on this trajectory to begin with. I mean, so much of South Africa is this already. A friend of mine, he lives in basically a private town, if you want to call it that. It's technically a suburb, but there's many people who live there. And it has a wall around it. It has security in and out. It's got cameras. And it's a very nice, safe place inside the walls, right? And it's a pretty nice place outside the walls too, but the problem is again the proximity to these townships. This place I'm talking about is not very far away from a pretty notorious township, so part of the danger. Cape Town mostly votes DA, then ANC and small parties, correct? DA don't have the interests of whites at heart. Yeah. And the thing, too, is they could just... It's not just whites. The biggest racial group in South Africa after the, Bantus are the Coloreds. And the Coloreds hate the ANC for pretty good reason. They're affected by, black economic empowerment too. And, the ANC's rhetoric and, they don't like coloreds. The ANC doesn't like coloreds and coloreds don't like the ANC. So they could just be like a minority party, which is what they are in effect. But the problem is that if they're ever able to grow the DA, that is, they have to attract black votes. But the one untapped resource in South Africa is, if you look at opinion polling on South Africa, they're very concerned about crime. They're very concerned about the, almost over 35% unemployment in the country. They're very concerned about the shit quality of education and service delivery, like we said, electricity, water, etc. They're very concerned about immigration as well from other parts of South Africa. Black South Africans don't like other Africans moving in to their territory. Now you hear this and you think, what is a platform that would do really well in South Africa? Black Trump, basically. And that is the one election strategy, or one of the election strategies, which has not been tried, is like a black right-wing populist. I think they would do extremely well in the country, and that's the thing too, is like blacks in South Africa aren't Marxist either. They recognize the necessity of private enterprise. And especially in some of the rural areas, they also kind of understand that they need white South Africans too, And again, like, this does not apply to the radicals or whatever, but they're like, yeah, the white man has business and gives me a job and et cetera, and my life's better when we kind of work together. And if you look at opinion polls on like racial tensions in South Africa, generally speaking, like, blacks aren't out to get whites. Generally speaking, you do have, like, again, the small organized minority who is, which, again, like we say, the organized minority always wins against the disorganized mass. But the disorganized mass, like I say, is like not particularly hostile against white people. But again, the problem is that the organized minority is. So that's something to watch out for. Might all die of AIDS first? Hopefully not. There's a lot of AIDS in South Africa, though. World's canary in a diamond mine. Yep. Canary in a gold mine. I learned something shocking recently. I think I want to say, 40% of all the gold in the world that currently exists was mined from Witwatersrand Plateau in Gauteng, outside of Johannesburg. 40% of the gold comes from that one little area in and outside of Johannesburg. That's insane. But it's true. There's a shit ton of gold in South Africa. BRICS might intervene at some point. To be fair, maybe. But what does, like, Russia have to gain from South Africa not collapsing? I mean, they don't need South Africa. They have all their own mineral resources involved. China might for food, I guess. Natural resources. But could they get those from other places? I don't know. Or should China need South Africa enough to rape SA of resources? Yeah, maybe. But like I said, Russia has a lot of these things on its own, which is trying to sell on its own. But China, less so. But I don't know. I think China certainly benefits from South Africa, but I don't know what percentage of exports go to China? Here, let me see. I'm going to go to Wikipedia real quick. Wikipedia, South African economy. It's bad. Yeah, we know. Let me see. Economic history. I don't want economic history of South Africa. I want the economy of South Africa. What are they doing today? Economy of South Africa is second largest in Africa after Nigeria. Yes, we know. Or at least I know. Economy is divided between first world and third world standards. Yes, we know. There's no tab that has really, well, I guess there's not. All right, so let me do another thing. I'm going to check South African exports to China. South African exports to China. It's called China. South African exports to China was $11.69 billion in 2022. Okay, so meat, edible, offal, $40 million, organic chemicals. So yeah, they buy some stuff, but not like a ton of stuff. Okay, so ore, slag, and ash. China buys $7.37 billion. Iron and steel, $1.32 billion. Copper, $338.8 million. Pearls, precious stones, metals, and coins, $500 million. So again, it's not nothing, but it's not like huge. I mean, I don't think China needs this stuff. Basically. Okay. So there we go. Unironically, Chinese taking over South Africa would be the best option. Return to colonial rule would at least bring some functioning roads and power infrastructure. Yeah, maybe, That's the thing about South Africa. It's never been a proper country. It's always been an economic zone, right? Because it's almost like a little mini empire with all these different tribes, different racial groups, and vast natural resources competing over who has power. If you had like a proper imperial or like colonial administration, it would probably work better, to be honest. On the whole, probably the best outcome, though, like I said, would be to just like let the individual sections be carved off. But I think there's too much invested in having South Africa be a unified state with the economic advantages that brings to whoever is at the top. So I don't know, man. It's just, and that's the thing too, is like even if the Western Cape did break away, legally speaking, would the rest of South Africa let them? Would the ANC let them? It's an open question. Chinese are indifferent to whites. That is true. Under apartheid, rand wasn't stronger than the pound. Now it's 20 rand to the pound. Yeah, so in the 70s, the dollar and the rand were at parity. Now the rand is worth 18 and change to the dollar. So yeah, there's no hope in SA. No, I don't think for the country as a whole, but for certain areas, maybe. I wouldn't say I'm totally black-pilled on every part of South Africa, but it's like saying I'm black-pilled on the United States. I am black-pilled on the United States, on the current government. Like, there's no way it can rule in perpetuity, and it shouldn't rule in perpetuity. Is the main thing. But, certain parts of it are still nice, and I hope that in the future there's a dispensation where we're allowed, places like I live, we're able to do things more their own way. And I think, like I said, with the Western Cape and the Zulus in particular, there's a chance that might be the case in South Africa as well. I wouldn't say maybe as good of a chance, but it's possible. And even if it is a shithole, hey, you got your Sandals Jamaica resort life to work for. Referring to Georgia offering to give white South Africans land to farm their country way back. Yeah, that's true. There was a lot of, or a not insignificant amount of Afrikaner farmers who moved to Georgia because the Georgian government was like, "Hey, we'll let you farm land for us." Let me see. We got that should matter to you as whites, considering you are white. I wouldn't say that. I mean, it's kind of an open secret. I am mixed. I have mixed my blood with the coloreds, which is a way to make them more white. As I like to think about it. I'm only joking. I didn't really think about that. My wife is Western enough. She's Christian. She's trad. She's virgin. She's hot. So I wouldn't marry her. But and I do like the colors. I do. I care about what happens to them. Like all my in-laws are coloreds, and they're really cool people. Salt of the earth people. Very, very cool. I like them a lot. So, and frankly, anything that's good, anything good that's going to come out of a Western Cape future is going to, it's going to involve the coloreds. And it's going to have to because, like I say, they're the biggest racial group there. Msaga. That actually sounds more South African or more African with the MS. Msaga. You do that a lot. A lot of MGs. You got a lot of those. You got a lot of NKs. You got MS. Msaga. Make South Africa great again. Love it. It was never great. All right. South Africa needs some vibranium. Wakanda forever. Yeah. West is toast. Demographic disaster. Maybe. But maybe not for all of it. South has pretty stable demographics. Where I live has pretty stable demographics. So yeah, I don't know. The future is uncertain, and I think that's sort of where I'll end it all on. What is the value of that to China, considering they're taking it and they refine it? I don't know. I can't tell you. Couldn't tell you. So I guess in summary, this is the thing I'll say. What the future looks like is very hard to predict. South Africa has multiple paths for it. So does the United States. Some of them can lead to a situation considerably worse than what we have now. Some of them better. Some of them stagnant. Some of them general decline, but still livable. And crazy shit happens all the time and throughout history. So if you look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, if you look at how the ANC took power with their, and we'll do another stream on that, on how the ANC took power at some point, because that's a very interesting story in and of itself. But how the ANC took power, how Napoleon came to be, and, the Ancien regime collapsed and stuff, or World War One being a wrench thrown in the works and deposing Tsar Nicholas and then creating the first communist state in the world. All of these, frankly, applied on a lot of chance or divine providence, to be frank. And you couldn't have predicted them at the time. And I think it's important to sort of have that open mind going into the future for where we're at now. Regimes lose faith in themselves and then they give way to other things. Regimes clamp down and become worse. People become deracinated or decadent or whatever. And I think for South Africa, the future is, it's not going to get a lot better in the immediate term, but in 20 years, 20 to 30, 50, let's say 30 years from now, when I'm a proper boomer, when I'm a millennial boomer 30 years from now, I have no idea what that country is going to look like. I have no idea what the United States is going to look like in 30 years. I have some educated guesses and like some different scenarios that I can prepare myself for, but I don't know which one of these is going to happen. I know it's likely based off current trends, but if the United States regime faces a real crisis, can it survive that? I mean, the elite are very unified right now, but it's brittle. I think everyone can feel that it's brittle. And I think in a real crisis, it's an open question as to what would happen then. And same thing in South Africa. I think a lot can happen very quickly, and it's not entirely obvious to me about what that future is going to be. On current trends, definitely decline. But long term, medium term, I don't know. Anyways, that's it. Thank you guys for joining my impromptu live stream. We got a good crowd tonight, which frankly kind of shocked by. I didn't think anyone would listen to this. If you are new to the show, please subscribe to Mr. Patriarch. If you're listening, please give this video a like. Helps out with the algorithms. And if you'd like to support the show, links to do so can be found in the comments below. You can find links to PayPal and Subscribestar. And yeah, anyone's cool by me, guys. So thank you very much, and I'll catch you all next time. Till then, keep well, and I'll see you later. Patriarch out.